Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. Our mission is to see a world well led. And our strategy to get there? To empower leaders like you to lead every day. So let's get to work.
If you've ever worked in an organization, you know it is a challenge to collaborate with others. We're going to talk today about something that we haven't maybe ever talked about publicly, and I'm so excited about it. Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And Mark, I say we haven't talked about it. We have talked about a lot of stuff. I look back, I think we've done over 1,000 podcasts between the two of us. And I know we've written over maybe 2,000 blog posts. And I really don't think we've ever talked about the idea of cross-functional teams publicly like this. I know you and I have talked about it a lot privately, but you have a lot to say about this. I know I've got some stuff to say, and I think there are going to be some people out there listening who are maybe struggling to achieve what they can because they've really not thought about how to get people to work together cross-functionally. So I'm excited about the conversation. Before we jump in here, hope you're doing okay today. Anything going on as we enter? Yeah. I'm gonna call it halftime. We're about a week away here from the first half of the year being up. So you doing okay at the halfway point?
I am. I just had my annual physical, and the doctor was pleased. I'm ahead of schedule. I've actually already met my year-end goals, so now I've just got to hang on, and very thankful for that, and energized for the second half.
That's great. Well, let's do more than hang on. Let's put your foot on the gas. Sounds like you can maybe run up the score. And I would say to anybody listening, if they're at halftime, maybe some adjustments need to take place, and maybe they also need to put the foot on the gas, run it up. But maybe there's some people who are behind and they need to make some adjustments and get to a better place. So congrats. I'm glad you didn't fail the physical like you told me years ago. You failed your first one, so it sounds like you're making progress.
Yeah, much better this time.
That's good. All right, so let's talk cross-functional teams today. I know you worked at Chick-fil-A for a long time. Y'all had lots of cross-functional teams. I've had them in my past. I want us to dive into this topic and see if we can help some leaders.
Yeah, I had the privilege to serve on hundreds of cross-functional teams. There may have been given years when I was on 15 or 20 in one year. And I think that's a little bit just a byproduct of a large organization when you have, various teams and various departments. But I don't think it's only an issue in large organizations. The reason this made our docket of things to talk about is I'm hearing, and I think you are as well, more and more leaders talking about how hard it is. And I don't know if it'll add value or not. Maybe it'll help us relate to the audience a little bit. Let's talk about why it's actually hard to work collaboratively in a cross-functional setting. And so we're not going to go deep on these, but I think it'd be good to share a few of the reasons so that you don't think you're alone and you don't think you're crazy. This actually is hard. So one, I would just say is that you can have different agendas across departments and functions. Where the innovation team is thinking about innovation, the accounting team may or may not be leading with those type of thoughts. And you can fill in your blanks, but just different departments and different functions, even though you're asked or assigned the opportunity to work together and to work collaboratively, that doesn't mean that everyone jettisons their bias. It doesn't mean that they leave behind their day job. In fact, they bring all of that with them, which is one of the challenges.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. I want to pull back half a step and pick up on the word you said there at the end, everyone. And I think sometimes we even may need to talk about individual and personal biases that we have, personal agendas maybe that we have. And you start putting people together on a team and I want what I want and you want what you want and she wants what she wants. It can really turn into a tug of war if we're not careful. And so I think that, there are departmental biases and agendas, but they're also, sometimes they're just, the fact is we're selfish. And if we're not careful, we don't really name it and we don't work together. We can have a hard time collaborating if we all have our own agenda.
Sure. And sometimes those individuals have volunteered to be on that team, and other times they've been voluntold, right? They've been assigned. And maybe it's a topic they have passion around. Maybe it's a topic they have no passion or no interest. And so they bring some of that with them as well. Now, here's another one that I hope after listening to this episode today that every leader would be sure this never happens again. And that's lack of clarity regarding the goal. You know, we've talked about this a lot. There are a lot of functional teams, existing work teams that don't have clarity on their goals. I would say there are even more cross-functional teams that have not either forged a consensus or been assigned clear outcomes and objectives. And we're going to talk more about that. But that creates all kind of challenges when you put 4, 6, 8, 10 people in a room and say, hey, we're going to work together. And if they're not real sure why or to what end, it just creates a mess.
Yeah, that's good. I think sometimes we also get those people around the table, and if we're not careful, we'll believe that we're collaborating, but the truth is we still have this tendency. I've noticed this before, to go back to our little what I would call silos. Other people have labeled it as silos, and we have this individual mindset instead of a collaborative mindset, and that really can war against what the collaborative team is trying to do. And so silos can be real. I know Patrick Lencioni's written about this. He had a book, Turf Wars, Silos, Politics. I can't remember exactly. It was something like that was the title, but it named that idea of there's so much of that goes on in organizations, especially in corporate. Not just corporate, in the nonprofit as well, but so many people have their own departmental agenda, and we think we're all good because we came to the same meeting, but we still may not be really. We're there, but not there. You know, we've said before, and I think that happens all the time.
Yeah, they're masquerading as a collaborative group, which leads to the last one I would share. You may have others, but I think we've got to be real clear. Collaboration, as we're talking about it, actually requires time on task together. I mean, there are other forms of collaboration, but I put it in air quotes because I'm not even sure that some of them are actually going to qualify. I mean, many times what, again, masquerades as collaboration is really just work sharing, where you divide work up and you do part of it and I do part of it, and we say we collaborated. Well, we didn't. We worked independently and individually. Now, we may try to bolt it back together at the end of the day. In fact, there's a story we uncovered several years ago. Ross Brawn, the Formula One principal who grew up in the sport, that's a fascinating story for another day. When he took over as the head of Ferrari Formula One racing, he discovered that they were building the engines in one country and they were building the chassis and the rest of the car in another country. And he said his first decision was to move them to the same location. He said, you can't collaborate if you're working independently and individually. And of course, he made it much more poetic. He said, a car is not a collection of parts. It has a soul, and so forth and so on and so on. And he said, we have to do this together. And so I think a lot of times when you divide and conquer, you're really not collaborating.
That's fantastic. There's a phrase that I picked up somewhere along the way. I don't know who first said this. It wasn't me, but I've said it so many times. And I think this has been helpful to several leaders that I've worked with, and we've talked about it. And it may be helpful here in the context of this conversation. And that's this, that the team that you're on is more important than the team that you lead. And I know we could debate that here. It's not, when it comes to a cross-functional team, that may or may not be true. But I think sometimes we have a tendency to think that the team that we lead is the most important team and all that. And yet, especially if I'm reporting to somebody, which is a little different in a cross-functional, this is more in the real structure. I can have this tendency to think that what I'm doing and what I'm leading is more important than where I'm being led. And I want to just remind people, the same thing is really, if I'm in a collaborative environment, when I'm in that environment, I want to make sure that I take off my other hat, my leadership hat, my siloed hat, if I could use that language. And let's really work hard to be a part of that collaboration, because it's going to ultimately lead to greater productivity for the organization. And we've always said that talent belongs to the organization. Teams do as well. And there's all kind of teams. We've named the challenges. Let's see if we can't help people solve some of this. I think there's some things that that cause the problems. And I know I'm going to let you, I'll let you go first here, but I'm guessing I know what you're going to say first. Like what's the problem here? Why can't people seem to get this more right than they do?
Well, as with many questions, as we've discussed over the years, it really starts with leadership. And
I know the answer is going to be leadership.
Well, I really don't want anybody to check out and go, yeah, you think everything's about leadership. Well, a lot of things are about leadership. Yep. But when you think about the challenges of cross-functional work, I would argue in many ways it's more difficult than ongoing leadership of an existing intact team, right? A lot of cross-functional teams are ad hoc and they're brought together for a season or for a project or, a particular assignment. And so if you just think about the dynamics, some of those that we just mentioned previously about functional agendas and individual bias and individual agendas and on and on and on, this is going to require, to do this well, requires a lot of leadership. Now, what does it look like? I would argue it looks a lot like leadership in other domains. You've got to have vision. You've got to communicate that vision clearly and frequently and succinctly and repetitively. You've got to be sure you've got the right team members, right? Just because you need somebody from marketing doesn't mean you'll take anybody from marketing or finance or whatever. You actually need to try to build the team with as much care and thought as you possibly can. You've got to help the team figure out what a win looks like. We'll talk about that in just a minute. You need to be sure the team has got resources. I mean, you just on and on and on, and you may have some things you want to add, but a successful team, they're not going to do it on their own. I mean, it's great to empower people and it's great to delegate, and those are all good things. And you want them to manage the work, but you don't want them to lead the work. Every team needs leadership, whether functional team, intact team, or most especially a cross-functional team needs leadership.
Yeah. Well, and I'll just add a couple of random ancillary thoughts here. Or maybe they're not random. Maybe I think they're really important, but this goes back a little bit to where, John Maxwell said, everything rises and falls on leadership. This is one of those everythings. I think sometimes we hear that and we go, yeah. Like you said, leadership, it's all about leadership to you guys. But the truth is, that's the mantle of leadership. It's like, you can't just lead whatever it is you're leading and then leave that to something else to chance. You've got to have a way to think about this. And it's what we talk about all the time, Mark. We dream, of a world well led, and we've kind of tweaked that to your world well led. If somebody's listening, it really is your world that you're trying to lead there, and it's going to rise and fall on whether you do your job and wear that mantle well. And so I think, it's a heavy responsibility, but I love that you're calling this out and saying it starts with the leader. All the cross-functional teams I've seen be successful, that any team I've ever seen be successful has always got a great leader, right? I mean, it's just huge. So that's a good place to start.
And let me say this. Some of you may have over the years seen in the press from time to time, there's a movement that raises its head, and it's always short-lived, and it's called self-led teams. It's an impossibility. Again, every team needs leadership. You want them to manage the work. You want them to be empowered, and you can even delegate to them. But every team needs leadership, and cross-functional teams are no exception. So that's the starting point if you want to do this well.
That's great. Okay, so I want us to take a few minutes on the second one here. Leadership number one. I think clarity becomes, 1A. This is what the leader does. The leader makes sure that we're clear on really what we're trying to do. And by the way, I think this is a good opportunity to mention, you and I have written about this, about clarity, in our upcoming book. And Mark, I've got a copy right here I say a pre-copy. This is not going to be released until September the 2nd. So we're a couple of months out from this thing going to market. And by the way, if anybody's looking for the operating system that we've created, basically what we're calling 3 essential disciplines that will unleash the passion and performance of everyone in your organization. Man, this is so fun, Mark, that we've had a chance to work on this book. Hold a copy now for the first time. Just got one last week. I know you did as well. And these are going to be a lot of fun. So if you need a copy of the book, I hope you'll go ahead and pre-order that September 2nd. But we write about clarity in here, Mark. And there's a whole section on that. But I think clarity is so undervalued. I was a couple of weeks ago, I went to the eye doctor. I hadn't been to the eye doctor in years. I had LASIK surgery back maybe 2000. I mean, it's been 25 years, I guess, since I had LASIKs, and I'm wanting to make sure, like, is everything good, and, get checked out. And so I go to the eye doctor, and my eyes are still pretty good. And she says, well, you really don't need an enhancement. I was thinking, I'll just get them zapped again and that'll make it great, and she's like, you don't need to do that. She said, you're not off that much. She said, but I could give you some lenses that could, that would help you see just a little bit better if you want that. And I'm sitting there in the chair thinking, why would I not want that? I mean, why would you not want to see as clearly as you can? I mean, this feels like a pretty easy decision. And yet she's like, I don't know if you want to or not, and so I opted for a pair of glasses that I can wear when I drive, which will help all the people out there that I'm on the roads with. They do give just a little bit more crisp, vision there. And I think sometimes as leaders, we forget that we've got to keep things crystal clear for the people around us. And so I would love for us to spend just a second, if we're going to have a collaborative team, let's talk about some of our team charter content here for just a second, Mark, and we'll run through these pretty fast, but let's start with the idea of purpose. I love that you've challenged me through the years. Anytime we start a team, let's ask ourselves the question, why are we starting a team? Why does the team exist? What is it that we're trying to do? What can we do together that we wouldn't be able to do individually as a work group? And I think that's a good place to start. And so if there are people out there that are struggling with their cross-functional teams, it may be because they've really not thought through, why do we even meet and have this team? And if 3 or 4 other people think one thing and somebody else thinks another, there's a lack of alignment there. It just gets messy. But that clarity is on the leader. It goes back to what you talked about with the leadership. That leader's got to make sure that everybody's clear. And so many times it can be clear in my mind, but it may not be, and I can make an assumption that it's clear to everybody else, but I've got to be ruthless with this because, what's the old vision leaks? It really does. It does get fuzzy over time. And we really can't give everybody, I wish we could give everybody leadership LASIKs here. We just zap them one time and everybody get it. But I think leaders have to keep calling people back to clarity. So it starts with that purpose to me.
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned we're going to run through several attributes that we would suggest you consider in your team charter. I want to say 2 more things. This is certainly true and applicable for cross-functional teams, but I think you and I would both agree you need a team charter for every team going forward, and you might find value in going back to some existing teams and clarify or codify the charter where there are assumptions and there's been turnover and change in leadership, and you think people believe or you hope people know. It's like, let's just clarify it. I think
that's a great call.
We'll find it extremely liberating. So, but as we talk about cross-functional collaboration, I think it's one of our 3 keys. So let's come back to, you said purpose is first. I would say the second thing you need to be crystal clear on are the deliverables. Because if you think about it, you've got a lot of things you could be asking that team to deliver. Maybe it's a recommendation, or maybe it's a plan, or maybe it's a proposal, or maybe it's a product. Well, I think that's a level of clarity, but let's go a little further. If you want them to recommend a plan, does that include budget? Does that include staffing plan? Does that include the rollout plan? Does that include the prototype phase? I mean, I think the more details you can provide up front, the greater likelihood your team is going to be successful. I've actually said this before when people have asked me, what's the number one factor in determining the success of a team? And I'm going to surprise you, Randy. It's actually not leadership, it's clarity, because I've seen teams with leadership that weren't successful because they didn't have clarity. So you mentioned earlier 1 and 1A. I mean, you got to give these teams clarity, and I think deliverables needs to be at the top of your list, right there with purpose. You got to tell them what you expect them to do.
Yeah, that's great. Let's make the next one really key milestones. Like, when is the work to be completed? I think that's sometimes we just have this team that meets, and we just a never ending, quest and to where, what's the date? We need to,
but let me jump in. That might be considered a deliverable. You might say it's got to be due by June 4th or whatever. But I think there's still the question of milestones, because there may be points where they need to check in, or when they need to share their work, or when they need some type of a stage gate that they've got to move through before they're going to be given the next, permission to move forward or more money. There are a lot of teams out there that have a deadline, but they don't have agreement on milestones.
Right, exactly. Like the first draft, and do we need a prototype or a product, launch? When's that? I mean, all this stuff. Am I going to need approval along the way if I get to this point? And do you want to see my work, so to speak? I just think there's so much there that we can, if we're not careful, we can miss that. So those key milestones are important. All right, give us another one. You got another thought?
Yes, design principles. And the simplest way to talk about that in this format is any decisions that have been made before the work starts, you need to tell the team. And that feels really obvious, but I've encountered this before with organizations where they're going to do leadership training and they have people working on it. And then when they share their work, they go, oh, we meant to say it's all got to be delivered by our own internal leaders. And you've created a proposal where you use outside vendors. Well, that would have been a design parameter to know up front. I mean, you just imagine it's an attempt to minimize surprises, which almost always result in rework. Like, what's already been decided? Maybe you have to do a prototype, or maybe you can't work with outside vendors for intellectual property concerns. They're saying you've got to do this work in-house. I mean, let your imagination run wild, but you need to say, are there any decisions that have already been made that are going to impact and affect this work? And put those in the document.
Yeah, that's a good one. How about boundaries, Mark? I mean, I think it's important for us to make sure that we know what our boundaries are. These are the lines that can't be crossed. This is what, these are the expectations, and let's make sure that we stay within inside the yard, so to speak. We don't cross the lines. And I think sometimes that we're not, there's just all this vague stuff. And I'll use an example here. Let's say we're having our expectation is to deliver a training event. Well, is attendance going to be voluntary, or is it mandatory? Do we expect people to pay for it, or are we just doing this? And I think those are some examples there. I've got a company that we work with, which is a little bit different here than a cross-functional team. But when we signed our deal, the president of this company, she told me, she said, we can't do any training during the fourth quarter of the year, as an example. And she said, you can load the calendar anywhere you want to, but the fourth quarter of our year, they have a funny kind of rhythm with their conferences and stuff that are going on. And she said, we're already overloaded there. We need to do our training in the first 3 quarters. And so that boundary really helped us know how to design, their work. And so I think that happens with cross-functional teams. We just have these lack of boundaries, and then everybody's stepping all over everything. And there's just this, again, it's a lack of clarity is what it is.
Exactly. It's not a lack. Now, let me make an observation here, because some of you are probably thinking, Well, some of the boundaries sound like design principles, and some of the design principles sound like boundaries. They're first cousins. If you're not sure, put it on either list. Just be sure you
Just put it on a
capture these
list.
things. Yeah, you just set the team up for success. Tell them what you already know so that they don't have to figure it out the hard way.
All right, I'll give one more here. How about budget? Don't we need to explain, like, here's how much you can spend and spend this on that? And, you know, there so many times where we're coming back and we're not really sure what the budget was, and
Yeah.
there's other factors here. And so I just think this is important for us to make sure that we name this.
And people are thinking, well, of course. No, I have seen so many teams that were chartered to do work without a budget. I even know of a situation in an organization where a team was chartered, a cross-functional team. They went out and did a lot of really, really, really good work. I mean, I had a peek at some of their work, and it was going to cost $1 billion.
Wow.
And when they brought it in, their sponsor said, "Oh, we don't have $1 billion. You're going to have to redo this." And he said, the team leader told me this story. He said, "Well, sir, before you redo it, you got to tell me how much money you do have." Because they built $1 billion plan, and the organization didn't have $1 billion to spend.
Well, and you can take, Mark, when you start talking budget, you can take boundaries and put them in place there too. Like, does our budget, is it going to just be for 1 year? Is it going to go over into multiple calendar years? We may need to talk about that. Is it going to be for just design or design and delivery? And so you can have those conversations any way you want to. I think the problem is so many times we don't even give thought to it. And then we're all frustrated with each other because we went over budget, or I gave you all this money and you didn't spend any of it. And a lot of times we just don't know. And so I think these are great conversations to have. All right, where would you go next? You got another thought?
How about team membership? When you create a charter, you may or may not want to mention specific people. I mean, you could, if you know, I want Joe on this team and I want, Sabrina on this team, but you may not know that. But if you're the one creating the charter, you may know which departments or functions must be represented. And you can even give the facilitator some discretion. I've actually done that before, where I said, here are 4 functions that have to be represented. I'm kind of on the bubble on these other 2. You, as the facilitator, because I would suggest you need to name the team leader or the facilitator, and that's who I'm usually reviewing a charter with if I've created it. And I'll give them some liberty or discretion. Sometimes you'll tell that team leader or facilitator that you, as the sponsor, you want to actually review their candidate pool before they go out and start asking people. But who's on the team matters. We've talked about that a lot over the years, not necessarily in this cross-functional context, but just talent is one of those most critical elements for the success of a team. And when you can address some of those issues in the charter, I think you're going to be better off.
Yeah, that's good. And you used the word there a couple of times, sponsor. I want to just name that here as we land this charter kind of mindset. I think the sponsor is important. I've seen before multiple names of they're sponsoring this. Like, who really is sanctioned the work? It may not be the facilitator, but who's, ultimately where does the buck stop? Who's got the team's back? Who's really overseeing this thing? And I think it's important not to have multiple names there. I love naming a person that is the person. And so I think I would just call that out here before we move on. So we've got, anything you want to say there? We got leadership and then clarity. Anything else about clarity?
Well, my last thought on the sponsor, I want the most senior person possible. I mean, probably not the president of the company, but sometimes the president of the company will sponsor a cross-functional team. And I know of examples where that has happened, and you can get a lot done when the president of a company says, I'm going to sponsor this team. But I'm just saying, as opposed to naming a frontline supervisor as the sponsor, again, right. Love those men and women. We've all been there. But I think you want to get the highest level person that has a passion for the work and the project. Right? If it's about a new accounting system, I probably wouldn't want the sponsor to be the head of marketing. You want somebody senior level who has a passion for the project in an ideal world to be the sponsor.
Okay, so we have leadership, we have clarity, and we called them 1 and 1A. You can order them however you want. You got to have them both. You can't do this without it. But there's a third thing.
Well, you got to have this one too.
You got to have this one too, because this is the deal right here. So land a plane here on this third one.
Yeah, it's vigilance. No team starts out planning to run in a ditch. They don't start out planning to waste time and waste energy and waste effort. And it's leadership that will keep the team functioning, help them perform to their full potential. You've just got to stay engaged. Now, I mentioned that you still want to empower people and you still want them fully engaged and you want to delegate the responsibility of doing this work. All that's true, but you still have to stay in touch. You've got to be sure that things are working, that they're on track, that they have the resources they need. There are going to be times along the way they're going to need clarity, and you can provide it. Maybe it's to clarify what's in the charter, or it's to clarify something you didn't put in the charter. There are any number of ways. You need to recast the vision again. Maybe they determine that they need more money and you've got to see if you can go get them some more money, on and on and on and on. But just because you've got a team working on your behalf on something of significance doesn't mean that you get to wash your hands of it and wait 6, 9, 12 months for the final product.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Okay, well, we'll land it there. I want to give a little bit of a challenge here to anybody that's out there leading and they've got in their organization, any cross-functional teams. If you have any, this might be a good week to do an audit. I say a good week. This might be a good point in the year. It is halftime. Are your teams over the last 6 months behaving the way that they should? Are they leading the way they should? Are they getting the results they should? And when we do this audit, let's pay attention to 3 things: leadership, clarity, and vigilance. What's maybe the gap there in any of those? And you might even come up with a short action item list. I like action, Mark. I love this idea of we practice our way to high performance. Let's create 2 to 3 things that we maybe can do in each of those. And you may even want to start with those team charters. Let's go back to some of those questions we ask and things we talked about today. This might be a good episode for a cross-functional team to listen to together and to have some discussions on. I think any of us can get better. The reality is our teams are going to be so important. If we can get it right, I always say that when teams come together, they actually set themselves apart. And I think it just really becomes a competitive advantage when the people around your organization are working together, collaborating, bringing their silo, understanding of all those verticals to the table, breaking down those silos and working in harmony. There's really nothing better than that. When it is almost harmony is probably a good word to end it with. When you hear a group of people who can sing, we wouldn't probably be in the choir, Mark, but when people can harmonize together, it really is a beautiful thing. And I think when a cross-functional team brings their expertise to the table and they really understand what they're fighting for, because they've been well led, they have clarity, and they stay vigilant, it makes beautiful music in an organization. And that really would be our hope for anybody who's listening today. So I hope you'll continue to share with your friends, your coworkers, the leaders help us spread the message here of the podcast. And again, if you're looking for the book, I'm holding it up again for those of you who are watching on YouTube. Lead Every Day coming out, our operating system. Mark, so excited about that. It's going to be good. We'll say more about that in the weeks to come. We'll leave you there. Remember, the best leaders lead every day.